this is my selected topic here, which would be the stigma in child victims of human trafficking. So I just chose this topic because the book Slave Across the Street by Teresa Flores was the most impactful readings I experienced throughout this course, and it was just something I really wanted to go more in depth and just kind of put a spotlight on myself. So, moving on from that, just quickly here, opening with a quote from Teresa herself. This is at the end of the book in Appendix A, when she's just going over a general Q&A, and I just really enjoyed this quote. I led with this quote because I think it really embodies and encapsulates the inner thoughts and feelings that child victims live with every day, every second of the day. So, unfortunately, the humiliation and the guilt, it's obviously hard to read and see, but it's just the general truth, and unfortunately, that's the reality, and that is the reason I am tackling this stigma, because it shouldn't have to be that way. So, alright, so just moving on from that quote there from Teresa, these are just a few key terms that are needed to fully understand the stigma around children victims of human trafficking. So, obviously, just the four here. The most important one being stigma, that is defined as a person or group that gains an attribute given by another group that is deeply discrediting. So, obviously, that is the conflict that I am trying to tackle today here against child victims of human trafficking. So, moving on here. Quickly here, just the webinar that I attended was the Human Trafficking Prevention webinar, Human Trafficking Trauma Panel discussion. So it was very relatable and relative to this topic, and had a lot of great insight information. So it was held by the Texas Education Agency, and that webinar series was fully funded by Texas State Schools. So they're making a big push over there to spread awareness and exposure to human trafficking. So these are my three list of possible solutions that I came up with to help end the stigma in child victims of human trafficking. So my first and most longed for solution, but I don't believe is necessarily a viable option for society, is the mindfulness and critical thinking that could be applied to a topic like this, and would really, really, cease to exist the stigma and stereotypes towards victims. So, obviously a great option, but not something I believe is gonna happen anytime soon. Moving on, the second possible option I came up with was to launch some sort of trend or challenge on social media. And when talking about impact and exposure, there's nothing like a trend or challenge that can really circulate a message, whether good or bad. Obviously, concerns of bullying and a negative message being spread are very high, but I believe the exposure and just general exposure would really, really have an impact. So, which this might not be a viable option, considering it's not easy to go viral, most would say. But moving on to the last and most practical option for most people would be creating a web page or a social media page, generally spreading information and the message to end stigma in child victims of human trafficking. So, reaching out to a community on the internet would be extremely beneficial and impactful, and that could reach much more than just your local community or something like that. So the solution that I thought best would be just any type of social media approach. A challenge or trend would be great, but obviously that's not something necessarily in the control of the person spreading the information, more so the people receiving it. But that would be great if it could happen, and then an informational page regarding information to end the stigma of child victims and human trafficking would be extremely beneficial, very impactful, and practical to most people, obviously, as social media accounts are free applications to use. And lastly, these approaches are proven to create real change and real public discourse and real ways of thinking. So obviously, this would reach a mass amount of audiences and would be somewhat thought-provoking, no matter how the medium was presented by the amount of exposure. And lastly, there are my references. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to any type of peer critiques and reviews towards this general informational study. So thank you.